Okay. Good evening. Happy Monday, everyone. I am coming in a couple minutes early today because I'm super excited and ready to get going with our conversation with our special guest for the evening. So come on in the room and we look forward to getting started here very shortly. So for those of you who may not know me, my name is Marcy Thomas, and I am the founder of Brown Girl Collective and also the BGC Book Club, which has been around for a little over a year now. Actually, it was April of last year that we started. So in that time, we've had the opportunity to talk to a lot of wonderful authors, and tonight is no exception. I'm really excited about this conversation. I'm also excited to see a lot of good folks in the room early. So if you don't mind, please drop where you're from in the comments just so we'll know who all is here. And since I have a good group in here already, thank you so much, folk, good people. We're not going to delay getting started this evening. So once again, if you don't mind, letting us know where you're joining us from, and we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm really excited tonight. Let me go ahead and grab my copy of the book. I'm really excited tonight to be talking to Dawnie Walton, who is the author of The Final Revival of Opal Nev. It's a really great book. If you've read it, you will know that I'm telling the truth. If you haven't, hopefully tonight's conversation will inspire you to go ahead and grab it. Okay, and I see we have Yvonne from Hawaii. Welcome, Yvonne. That's quite a ways away. I'm in Georgia. So welcome from Hawaii. So Dawnie Walton is the author of the novel, The Final Revival of Opal Nev, her spectacular debut that was named one of 2021's most anticipated books by Essence, where she was once a deputy managing editor, Vogue, Oprah Magazine, Elle, The Independent, Lit Hub, Pop Sugar, The Millions, and Hype Bay. Her work as a fiction writer and journalist explores identity, place, and the influence of pop culture. A McDowell Colony Fellow in 2015, a 10 House Scholar in 2017, and a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop with an MFA in 2018, Dawnie has worked as an executive level editor for magazine and multimedia brands, including Essence, which you've already mentioned, Entertainment Weekly, Getty Images, and Live. A native of Jacksonville, Florida, she currently lives in Brooklyn. So without any further delay, we're going to go ahead and bring up the beautiful Ms. Dawnie Walton. Welcome.
Hey, hi, Marcy.
Hi, so good to have you here, and really excited about this conversation that we are about to have. And
yes, I'm delighted.
Yes, put up the name of the book for those who might join later and did not see that. So wow. I mean, I don't even really know where to start. I mean, there's just so much to
We're just talking. It's casual.
Girlfriends having a conversation. So first of all, I just really want to congratulate you on the book. And, it's been getting a lot of great buzz and all of that. And, as I mentioned, I can see why, as I really enjoyed it immensely, but consider it one of my favorites of the year.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I know you read a lot, so that is that means a lot.
Right, yeah, you can see a little piece of it behind me.
I was looking at the spines. I was trying to.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And that's just one side. There's actually another side as well. So yes, I do read a lot. So, but one of the things, just kind of how you got into writing. Of course, you've been a writer for many years, as a journalist and things of that nature. And one of the things I found interesting about your story is that you worked as a journalist, as I mentioned, but you were writing, like getting up early in the morning and writing, working on your novel. And that reminded me of Toni Morrison.
Oh, yeah.
You did something similar. So what was it about whatever you were doing in your day-to-day career that you also wanted to do something different and write your own book? What was it that inspired you to do that?
Well, first of all, can we talk about how amazing Toni Morrison was, that she was doing all of that? She was an editor at Random House, a mother of 2 children, and still finding time to write longhand.
Right.
The most brilliant novels of our times.
Absolutely.
So, what I was doing was like nothing. But to answer your question, always wrote stories from childhood. You know, I remember going on a family trip to Miami on the Amtrak train and writing the sort of adventure of that. And I wrote little plays and all of that. And I grew up kind of a practical kid, and that's not anything that my family ever put on me, because my family is actually full of artists as well. I have an uncle who's a painter. My grandfather was also a painter, and everyone loved music, but it was just making a living as an artist was not anything that I had ever really seen. And so following that path, I was sort of thinking, you know, well, I can still translate what I do into a different form of writing, which for me was journalism. Mm-hmm. And so that was sort of the practical path that I decided to take. Kind of funny now, considering, you know, journalism has really changed. Media has changed as an industry since that time. But went to Florida A&M, was on sort of like a narrow, straight path up the ladder, started in newspapers, transitioned to magazines. And in 2013, I hit a point where I just kind of, you know, you reach a certain age and you think, is this just going to be what I do? You know, this is lovely. I love this. I love my work. It fills me with pride, but I never really gave my dream a chance. And especially working at a place like Essence, where you're covering so many amazing Black women who are inspiring and who are making their dreams come true. And that kind of started rubbing off on me. And so, you know, I had this idea for this book, really the idea for the two characters first. And I just started for myself, never really thinking it was going to, you know, become anything. Started writing the novel, like you said, early in the mornings, waking up at 5 a.m. before I had to be at the office at 10. And then sometimes if I had energy after work, I would pick it back up. And it just, the story compelled me, you know, it felt like play to me to be working on the novel. And I just sort of chipped away at it. And it reached a point where it was like, okay, it's time to pursue this more seriously. And that's when I decided to actually leave Essence and go to graduate school in Iowa.
Well, that's a really great story, because there are so many of us who might have a dream. And, you know, there was a book I read years ago. Actually, I think he's from Florida as well. Delatoro McNeil, I want to say. It's called Caught Between a Dream and a Job. And sometimes we can have this great job, but we still have this dream. And so, you know, your story definitely says that. And quiet as it's kept, when I was growing up, I always loved Essence magazine. And one day I had a desire to work for Essence, actually. But life took a different turn. And, you know, now I'm doing Brown Girl Collective, because as you said, things have changed in publishing. So now any of us who have a desire or a dream, we can kind of start our own platform. So that's kind of where I've landed. So,
and look at us, look at where we are now. I mean, we're a year into this show. It is such a wonderful and necessary platform. And for, you know, Black authors, like, we are so glad to talk to our Black readers that we write for and write to. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Now, speaking of the book, and you deciding to talk about music, I know you mentioned how you had people in your family that were artists, so you were kind of used to that artist lifestyle. So you did grow up, you know, listening to a lot of, you know, R&B, like a lot of us did. And we were talking about, we had a love for, you know, Sly and the Family Stone and things like that. But as you grew older, your musical taste kind of changed somewhat. Talk a little bit about that experience.
Well, you know, it's interesting to think back at my family and the different music they liked, you know, that was for their generation, you know. So my grandparents into the jazz vocalists. And then when my parents were in their 20s, you know, they were listening to a lot of Marvin Gaye. You know, my mom tells stories about the house parties they would go to. They call them sets, you know, and they would just listen to, the whole purpose of the party would be to listen to what's going on, you know. And then when I came of age, they were a few different things happening in music. It was the golden age of hip hop, right? So you had a lot of stuff happening there. And my cousin was very much into like native tongue, so De La Soul and Tribe Called Quest and all of that. And I really liked that. And then there was alternative rock, which was just kind of breaking open. So you had Nirvana with Smells Like Teen Spirit, and that just sort of revolutionized everything and changed the course of rock and roll and kind of opened a door that I was really very curious about. And so, you know, a lot of this book was kind of reconciling my love for all kinds of different music, but especially, you know, I really was into the alternative rock and the indie rock. And it was complicated for me because you didn't often see Black girls, you know, in that scene. And so my goal with Opal was to, you know, draw on a lot of influences to sort of create this character that I could insert into a history that would make her, you know, a godmother of all of those kinds of music.
Absolutely. And that she was. And, you know, one of the things we talked about a few minutes before we started, you know, I love the fact that you had her be from Detroit, which, of course, when we think of Detroit, we think of Motown, we think of Aretha, we think of the Clark Sisters and gospel. But we don't think of, you know, Detroit as, you know, perhaps having artists that would come out of Detroit that may be into other types of music, like, you know, the alternative rock and indie rock and things like that. So I thought that was neat.
Yeah, there's so much different music out of Detroit. There's a lot of punk and a lot of Black punk actually out of Detroit. There was a band of three brothers like Black people and also who were actually like forerunners of punk. They were called Death. And so you had that group. You had another seminal group called MC5, Iggy Pop and the Stooges. And so, you know, I wanted to kind of represent all of those things and have Opal love all of it because she loves Motown as well. And then she also has a connection to the church. Her sister Pearl sings in the church and has actually, you know, a more traditionally beautiful voice than Opal. And Opal kind of has dreams of being on Motown or something like that. And that she ends up taking a different path. But the thing that I think is really interesting to me is that even though the music she ultimately makes is different from a Motown sound, the ethos is kind of the same. It's this kind of self-possessed, entrepreneurial, almost. It's a kind of resistance in the music industry that Opal represents, and I feel that very strongly from Motown in some ways. That here was this Black label, you know, that was doing it for themselves.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of Opal, and we'll get into Nev in a moment, but speaking of Opal, were there any particular Black female artists that you kind of patterned her after or that you had in mind as you were creating her character?
Oh, yes. So there were three main ones, and then there was little pieces of others, but I'll tell you about the three main ones. So there was Grace Jones, who for me, the look, the style, the attitude on stage. You know, I was thinking about Grace Jones kind of like with a hula hoop, you know, where she was kind of like half naked on stage. You know, that part was Grace. I was thinking about Nona Hendrix from the group LaBelle, which is actually, you know, a rock and roll group, vocal group, the first Black, you know, rock and roll women on the cover of Rolling Stone magazine. And Nona Hendrix was a lot of that driving force for the rock sound of LaBelle, and also kind of an Afro-futurist vibe that they had with the space suits and the costumes and the feathers. And then the third was Betty Davis, not the film star, but a 70s funk rock icon who was on the downtown scene in the early 1970s. She was married for one brief year to Miles Davis, and they credit her with electrifying Miles' sound. But she had her own career in her own right. She wrote her own music. She had a very interesting vocal style. She didn't even really call it singing, but it was more like vocalizations where it was like grunts and shrieks. And she had like a very provocative stage show. And her record label didn't really know what to do with her. And she ended up, long story short, she ended up leaving the music industry altogether and kind of going back to her hometown in Pittsburgh. And so those three women were really, the trifecta for me, for Opal. But there's also Eartha Kitt in her, the scenes in the garden. There's a very kind of viral clip of Eartha Kitt being interviewed in her garden, talking about, how ridiculous she thinks like the Black Club is. Right. So there's some of her. There's
for
what? Iconic. There's Tina Turner, of course, and there's Nina Simone in terms of the political sensibility and the responsibility that Opal feels to use her platform to speak out against, things that she feels are wrong. So all of those women.
Right, and when you mentioned Betty Davis, there is a documentary out about her right now, I believe.
That's right.
So for those, it's Betty Davis. So if you all look that up, you can learn some more about her life, to know who one of the inspirations for the book was. Now on the Nev side, of course, he's a Brit, So were there particular people that you had in mind in formulating his character?
So, I would say stylistically, there's not like as close a connection. But what I was really thinking about were the British artists who are chameleonic, they call them. So, they are able to enjoy different phases of their career. They go through different, sounds, appeal to different audiences, and they have these sort of long careers. So I was thinking about Rod Stewart, who started off in, a more rock and roll sound with a band called The Faces, and then he goes on to make like really mainstream pop music. I was thinking about Elton John and his sort of evolution and his showmanship. I was thinking about David Bowie a lot in terms of, especially the physicality of Nev, him being so tall and skinny. And I was thinking about David Bowie when he had his red hair, this Stardust era. So that's what I was thinking about. And then tapping into the idea of him being a chameleon helped to get at his character as well. It started having me ask questions about what it would mean for someone to be changeable like that. What it would mean for themselves as a person and what it would mean to other people.
Right. And that's one of the things that I really enjoyed about the book is it's written different. I mean, there are spots where there's dialogue, but more of the story is kind of like you're watching behind the music, or one of my favorites, Unsung, or that sort of thing, or reading a profile in a Rolling Stone or something like that. I liked that part of it because it did give you a chance to, instead of just seeing people having conversations and dealing with whatever conflict within those conversations, that they are being able to speak and tell their truths along the way. And I thought that was a powerful way to write the book. And, it definitely helped my interest, because I'm like, okay, now he said this here and this happened there, and what's going on here, and, that sort of thing. So I really enjoyed that you did it in that way.
It was fun to write it like that too. I just like to be able to, and for a minute it allowed me to put my journalist hat on, because as I was writing, I was thinking, okay, if I'm Sunny, who is the journalist character who's putting the story together, who would I want to hear from next?
Right.
And so it was just kind of fun to play like that and to nail or try to nail the different voices and to make each of them distinct. Yeah.
Yeah, and that actually would have required a lot from you because you had to be able to speak in these different voices. Okay, if I'm a British person who does this, what way would I describe things? Or if I'm a Southerner, how would I describe things? What would my life look like? That sort of thing.
For sure. And I think, with it's interesting writing Opal, writing Pearl. I found their voices easier to access because I'm Southern, but I would argue that all of us here in the United States are a little bit Southern. We all trace our roots back south. And so there's a lot of like phrases and language that is familiar to all of us, no matter where you live. And so I was thinking about like the elder women in my family when I was writing Opal's voice or Pearl's voice. Nev's voice, like I watch a lot of British television. That was helpful. I spent some time in London, which is different from Birmingham. It has a different sensibility, but still that was helpful. And when I was in graduate school, I had a professor who was hugely helpful in getting sort of the little details of Nev's childhood and his voice correct. She's from the UK, so she was really helpful with that.
One of the other things that I love in telling the story, it feels really real. It feels like a true story. And part of that is, of course, in the way that you're telling the story, but also in the fact that you incorporate a lot of history.
Yeah.
So what was that process like? Just, going and learning all these different things about different periods or different specific events.
So I have to tell you, Marcy, I'm so obsessed with the late 60s and early 70s in culture. I think it was a transformative time. It was a revolutionary time, especially for us. Mm-hmm. And one of my favorite jobs I ever had was working at Life. This was the resurrection of Life magazine. And what it was really a photography site where we partnered with Getty and we told stories through photo essays of current events, but also like really our bread and butter was going back in the archives. Mm-hmm. And I spent so much time, we would do, Martin Luther King's birthday or like major events in history. We would tell photo essays and find often photos that were never published in the magazine. And you would find them along with photographers' notes and sort of piecing together the context of an image and piecing together that history was always something that just obsessed me. I loved it. And I loved seeing how the past can mirror the present. Like that tension was also something that was very interesting to me. And so, it felt like it was something that I love to do anyway. And so, I love when I hear that it feels real to people because I do want it to feel authentic and to reflect those times that I was so interested in.
Absolutely. And speaking of photographs, within the book, there actually wound up being a couple of photographs, but there's one specifically that is iconic that kind of leads us into a certain, space or the story when things really kind of kick off and causes Sonny to want to know more of what's going on. And that's a photo of Opal and Nev at an event that's supposed to be positive, but turns into something else.
It's a big mess.
Yeah, it turns out to be a really mess. And sparks, a whole lot of things and changes the trajectory of their lives just from the snap of this one photo. So knowing that that's what you did for Life, that kind of makes sense that you did something like that in this book as well.
Yeah, and I feel like, how sometimes, I don't, anyone who's in the audience, anyone who writes, sometimes you tend to return back to a similar thing in everything you write. And for me, it's writing about photography. I love dreaming into visuals and thinking about like what's really happening behind the scenes in this picture and how did these people get here and how do they feel about each other and what happened after the shutter clicked. Like, I think they're very evocative, very inspiring to me creatively. And so I'm always, writing about photography. And I always knew that there was going to be a photo at the center of the book that would, as you said, change the trajectory of their lives and shoot them into a different kind of spotlight. I always knew that was going to happen, but it was just figuring out like what that photo was and what the context of the photo was.
And speaking of which, I noticed it before we came on, but behind you, there's a photo of Nina Simone and James Baldwin. So that's, anything about the history of that since we're talking about it?
Well, I know, I don't know a lot about their relationship specifically, except to say that, the celebrities of that time, the Black celebrities especially, were a very tight circle. And they often, the artists really worked in tandem. I know a bit about, and I mentioned this in the book, actually, the friendship between James Baldwin and Lorraine Hansberry was a very deep and meaningful one. And they were all kind of very creative souls that knew that they had a megaphone and were very deliberate in the ways that they presented themselves, whether it was on late night television, that James Baldwin is doing, or through song. And we were talking about this in the green room before, but the documentary Summer of Soul, and to see Nina Simone at the height of that moment for her, the height of that revolutionary power in front of that sea of Black people in Harlem was very, very powerful.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there is the connection of Lorraine Hansberry also with Nina Simone. She mentions that in that her To Be Young, Gifted, and Black. So yes,
that's right. That's right. Yes,
there was definitely a connection, that they all held with one another. And just thinking Nina and the parts of Opal that make me think of Nina is just the fact of her getting to a space of, after that event, really saying, it's time for me to stand up and really use my voice and say things that are tough for people to hear. And they might not like what it is that I have to say. And that's something that we definitely saw Nina do. But I think similar, it's just different types of music. But with Nina, oftentimes she was playing to a lot of white audiences as well as what Opal is doing. And to be able to be a Black woman artist and stand up for the things that are important to Black people in audiences that aren't always reflective of who we are, I think that's very powerful.
It is. I think it takes a lot of self-possession. It takes a lot of conviction to do that, and a lot of strength and a lot of vulnerability. Those situations, with Opal, those situations she was in were not always the safest for her to be in. As we learned from the Rivington Showcase, that kind of critical event. And so the question becomes for her, is she always going to, be that way? Is she going to stick to her convictions no matter what? And at what cost will she do that? Whether it's to her personal safety or to the state of her career, honestly.
And I just want to mention, if there's anyone who has any questions, please feel free, because yes, this is a dialogue, but we can invite you in as well if you have any questions of Dawnie or the book or the story or anything like that. So now, of course, the story is about Opal and Nev and their, kind of their rise and fall and rise. There's been a lot of ups and downs in a career, as there oftentimes are with music, as things change and artists decide to change or, opt out and then decide to come back in the case of Opal. But the story is also really about Sunny and about her being able to discover some things about her father, whom she never knew.
Right.
So how important was it for you to include that kind of like a subplot to what's going on with Opal and Nev?
Yeah. It's interesting. Sunny, actually, I had written probably about 2/3 of a full draft, which was just the straight oral history style. So just the interviews.
Mm-hmm.
There was no Sunny character at all for a long
Mm-hmm.
time in the process of writing this book. And then, I went to graduate school and I workshopped the pages that I had, and my classmates said, we think this is really interesting, but we're very curious. Who was everybody talking to?
Mm.
And that set my brain, kind of ticking. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting if there was another character who was a journalist that they were giving their interviews to, but she has a very personal tie to Opal and Nev, which is that her father was their drummer. And this is not a spoiler to say it's the very first line of the book, I promise. Right. Her father is killed at Rivington Showcase in basically a race riot that happens. It turns violent after Opal lodges a protest on stage against a Southern rock band who likes to flash their Confederate flag. Mm-hmm. So with the introduction of Sunny, that also automatically brought in a modern day timeline. So it brought in, at the time I was writing it was 2016. So the current timeline was 2015, 2016. And it allowed me to kind of explore the ways that time works and how media has changed or not changed. The way that the music industry has changed or not changed, and the way our conversations and our culture has changed or not changed over that period of time. And it just brought a different, I thought, for me at least. I know not everyone has been a fan of the Sunny notes, but for me, I loved it because it allowed me to deepen the story, I felt, and to give it a different kind of relevance for what we were going through at the time. I was writing a lot of the novel when the 2016 election was happening.
Okay.
And that was a lot. It kind of lit a fire under me in different ways. And it would almost be eerie how relevant what I was writing felt. Because the whole thing with the Confederate flag was in the book before it sort of reignited as an issue around Charlottesville. It was already in there. And it made me kind of reassess how I thought about time as more cyclical, I guess, or even that time is sort of like a straight line with little flashpoints along that line instead of kind of moving in an upward trajectory. And so it kind of, all of that kind of rearranged my brain and really affected the way the book came together in the end.
Absolutely. I enjoyed it. And I thought that was powerful because you could see how, as you said, it's cyclical. The more things change, the more things remain the same in certain ways, and looking at the whole thing of Charlottesville, which they just took down the Lee statue.
I saw.
To think of, I'm thinking of Bree Newsom in South Carolina, who climbed up and took down the Confederate flag, and just the things that Opal did, saying, I hate this thing, and then her taking a really strong stance and doing something which did spark some other things to happen, but it just shows that. And then in the modern day, to go forward and to see this final revival and have some things happen there where Black lives are still being treated differently. Black people doing the same things that white people do, and yet getting treated differently. So it definitely comes back to what happened earlier on. So I think without that Sunny aspect and being able to see real quote unquote real time things, you might not have been able to take the story in that way.
Thank you for saying that. It definitely, one of the things that I also wanted to explore was, I love telling this story from Opal's childhood and Nev's childhood, and you're able to see, that they're two outwardly opposite people. They do have some core things in common, though. They both kind of have lonely childhoods. They're both a little bit strange, both very talented and artistic, both hugely ambitious. Like, I think that's the thing that they both have in common. But, that ambition, one character is willing to do anything.
Right.
In that ambition, and the other is not willing to do anything for that ambition. And that's the core difference. And I think, that speaks to their different backgrounds, and they have different things at stake, much different things at stake.
I was just thinking that, because, a lot of times even it might not be in the music business, just in our day-to-day regular 9-to-5 jobs, you can see that how, a Black woman in a place of employment may not take the same risks as that white male may take, because she has other things to consider along the way. So, I mean, that plays out even, in the way that the story is told, and that, Opal also always had other things to consider. And not to say that there aren't Black women that are very ambitious and will do anything and don't care.
Right.
But, in this case, Opal was not that type of person.
That's right. That's right. And I also loved, the similarities and differences between Opal and Sunny. I think both of them have dealt with what it is to be one of the only ones, in their field. For Sunny, it's in media. She's the first Black editor of this Rolling Stone type magazine. And so she has been a lot quieter than Opal has, because Opal will say anything. She's just like, if she feels it, it's on her lips, but you can imagine, I don't get a whole lot into Sunny's background, but you can imagine kind of the things she sort of swallowed to kind of get to where she is, but you still see those microaggressions, the ways in which she's treated differently, the kind of biases that kind of stand in her way, the assumptions that people make about her, are the same things that Opal faced in the music industry.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And to just think of, like you say, the microaggressions, the different things that, not being able to express yourself, or maybe someone else wanting to take credit for your ideas. I mean, just so many things. And that is a difference, because Opal is kind of out here. She's like you said earlier on, kind of entrepreneurial in her way of doing things. So when you are your own boss, so to speak, there are things that you can do.
Right.
You still may have to suffer the consequences, because ultimately, I guess your followers or your fans would be your bosses in that case. But, it's definitely different than when you're trying to work within a corporate structure.
Yeah. And it's so for Opal, it was like giving her the entrepreneurial spirit, but knowing very well she's on a record label. Like, she still, she suffers consequences from doing whatever she wants to do, It would have been really impossible for any Black woman to have put out her own music. So in a way, she's still dependent on that system to get her art out there. So it's a difficult situation for her, and it's one in which she makes a lot of sacrifices, but they're mostly personal sacrifices.
One of the other things that you also touch on in the story, of course, she's the only Black female artist at the record label, but there are other women who are artists. And there are times when we see things happening with them where they are being kind of like Me Too'd. Situations where, women are being mistreated or, things like that. So that's something that also shows up, that it's a thing that a lot of people have dealt with. It may look a little different, but it's still some of the same things that we're hearing about now.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely. And that was playing out as well when I was writing the book, and that was on my mind. And also, the ways in which I think often intersectionality is not paid attention to. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. You know what I mean?
Right, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So I'm trying to think. One of the things I just love about Opal, she's just iconic as an artist. And, you said you had certain women that you kind of patterned her after and things of like that. But what she also does, even as a fictional character within the book, she kind of sets the stage for other women and artists to come behind her. As we do see that it happens in the book as well. But I was thinking about like the Afro-punk, and now we have groups that are now we're seeing in real time, women that are being a parts of different, what people might consider an alternative type of culture or music culture or way of being. So I like that part of it as well.
I loved thinking about, I love thinking about not only the women who inspired Opal, but who in real life she might have been an inspiration to. So I spent a lot of time, especially, so there's the last scene takes place at a festival that is like a Coachella. It's called Daring Do. And I was thinking about, what kind of artists would be there. And I was thinking about, everyone from Janelle Monáe to SZA to her, to Santa Gold, all these women who really stand on the shoulders of a combination of women, including the ones that I mentioned earlier, and who have really, because the music industry has changed. It's not so much like everything is digital, it's in the cloud, it's much more accessible. Like you don't really depend on a record label now. You don't have to depend on a record label now to get your art out. And I think that has really democratized things. And also, I think it's made listening a more experimental thing. I remember the days of like record releases came out on Tuesday and you saved up your little $20 to get whatever record, you wanted to get. And it was a big deal and it was an investment. And there are things that I miss about that, but I really love how the younger generations they have so much access to everything at their fingertips, and it's not so defining of a lifestyle anymore. It's just music that you can be curious about. You can learn. And so I was thinking about that as well, and how Opal would have inspired a lot of that.
Mm-hmm. And like you're speaking about the music, I recently, actually last year, I decided to get another actual record player. I started collecting vinyl again because that's becoming a thing. Of course, it's a lot more expensive than what it used to be back in the day.
So expensive. I know. Yeah, I have a little record player. My husband and I have a record player as well. And we're slowly building our collection. We go to little used stores and try to find some gems here and there, but you just can't beat that warmth of sound. Like that is the thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I had to chuckle, just a little sidebar. The place that I went and bought some music most recently, they actually had 8 tracks in there too. I'm like, 8 tracks.
Who's got an 8-track player anymore?
Yeah, exactly. But the 8-track, the tapes that they had were like $25, $30 for an 8-track tape. I'm like, oh my God.
Wow.
Can't even imagine.
I cannot. I still have my CD collection. I can't bear to part with it.
Right.
I
Well,
can't,
CDs, yeah.
Yeah. And I just love the liner notes, the fact everything was so tangible. And I just miss, with both records and CDs, when you get the album, putting it on and reading the lyrics along to the music and the way that it helped you memorize the songs in a much deeper way. I miss a lot of that.
Right. Yeah. Right. It definitely makes a difference. And just thinking in the book, Sunny, like being able to go and look at, the liner notes of an album and see her dad's name and to be able to, trace his name, there is just something about that did get kind of lost with the way things are nowadays. But, there are ways to recapture it.
Yeah, definitely.
Those who want to. So, well, wow, we've covered a lot in this. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to share about the book or the story that you want readers to know?
Gosh. No, I think this was a great conversation. Yeah, I mean, I do want to talk a little bit about the Paris chapter, because I had so much fun writing that chapter.
Yes, please talk about that.
So there's a scene, Opal and Nev, after they kind of launch into the spotlight, they go on a very tumultuous tour. And Opal is exhausted after, because it's been, like I said, volatile, sometimes violent, and she's kind of been carrying it on her back for reasons I won't say. It's a bit of a spoiler. And, this chapter where I send her to Paris. So once the tour is done, she decides that she's going to go on a vacation, I guess. She's only about 23 years old at this moment in her life. And she feels in a lot of ways she's lost the youth that she wants to enjoy. And, at that point, I know that, I talked a lot with my editor about that chapter, because I know that it feels like a bit of a diversion in the book. But for me, I just loved Opal so much that I wanted to give her a little bit of leisure and a little bit of luxury and a little bit of regrouping, and kind of take her out of that current moment in the United States, in the same way that Nina, left the United States for some time, in the same way that James Baldwin left the United States for some time, to get a different kind of perspective. And it's not as if they forgot about home. Actually, home called them back very often. And the same thing happens with Opal. But I just loved writing that chapter and imagining her walking through Goutte d'Or and through Montmartre and like all of those things. And I actually, in the last moments of editing and revising this book, I had the opportunity to go to Paris. And so it was kind of fun to add some more color to those scenes and really feeling like I was following her around the streets and all of that. So I just had so much fun writing that part of the book. And it was probably the part of the book that I revised over and over and over again.
Yes, I have had the opportunity to go to Paris, so I would agree. It's a beautiful place to visit. Like every other place, it's got different types of history, but I mean, you can't deny the beauty of it. You can't deny the fact that there were a lot of our greats, our Black American greats, who had an opportunity to go over there and live in ways that they weren't necessarily able to live in the United States.
Right.
And accomplish things and come back with a fresh perspective on life. And, not that they abandon, as you said, but they come back with a fresh perspective and to have been in a place where it wasn't so much about you. They looked at you more because of you being an American than it was because of you being
That's right.
Black per se. Right. And
That's right.
a real quick story about that, because I thought of myself, the time that I went to Paris. I remember being there and walking around and people coming up to me and asking me questions in French, and I didn't speak French. So I'm like, yeah. I'm like, no. I don't speak French. But yes, it's, you're American. And one time I was in the military at the time that I went, and I met a young guy who was also in the military. We were just hanging out for the day, and we went into this fur salon. Don't at me, people, because it was real fur. But we were in the fur salon, and it was so funny because they were like try this on. Ooh, you rich American.
Oh, wow.
We're in the military. I have pictures of me in the fur. Like, let me hurry up before they realize I can't.
I love it. Yeah. I just love placing her there. And not that I'm not idealizing it. Certainly right. France has its own issues and its right. history, especially with African immigrants.
Absolutely.
But it was just a different experience for Opal. And it was a moment of self-care that I felt was revolutionary for her. And that was very important for me to squeeze into the book.
Right. And actually, it makes a lot of sense because Opal, along the way, she was a person who, what word can I think of? She was very self-aware.
Yeah.
So, just to realize that she needed a break, because actually, she went over there initially to participate in, was it the Battle of Versailles? She went to go see it, go view it. And some of you may be familiar with that, is when they had, all of the, they had a lot of the Black models of that time where they're showcasing fashions from America, and then they also had people from Paris showcasing their fashions. And it was the Battle of Versailles, and she went over there to observe that because of her connections and things like that, and then decided to stay. So there's definitely value in that. So thank you for bringing that up.
Sure. Yeah, it's a little piece of the book I don't get to talk about enough. So yeah, thanks for letting me go on about it.
No problem. We're here for you. We got you. So tell us what's next. Of course, we know you are still making the rounds and, sharing this story with everyone. So what is going on with you next? Are you working on anything else, or is there anything coming up specifically? I'll show a picture of the book again. Is there anything specific going on?
Well, right now I'm still, like you said, heavily in, talking with book clubs and in promotional mode and really enjoying meeting readers. I am in the process. I have something that might be a second book. I'm not quite sure yet. It all starts with characters for me. And I'm thinking about a little circle of friends. And following them from college years into their 40s. But we'll see. We'll see if it turns into something. I've really got to sit down. I have my whiteboard. You can't see it, but it's in my office right next to me. And I got to do some sketching out and figuring out what the story is, because I'm just learning who the characters are right now.
All right. Well, that sounds good. So you start with the characters and then okay. Because I know every writer has a different process.
Yes. Yes. We all do it differently, but it's really, for me, it's having the characters and then asking a series of what if questions about them. What if this happened? What if they went there? And that the story kind of develops out of that.
All right. Well, that sounds good. Well, I have been scrolling the ways that people can stay in touch with you. So on Instagram at Dawnie Walton, on Twitter also at Dawnie Walton, and on the web at dawniewalton.com. So if you haven't had a chance to pick up a copy of the book or read it or finish it, please do so, because I'm sure that you will enjoy it just as much as I did, especially if you're a music lover. Because for me, I love music. And as I mentioned earlier on, I watch a lot of those documentaries and things like that. So for me, it was like reading a documentary.
There's so many good documentaries. I love them all.
Right. Absolutely. And the other one, just real quick that I thought about for those who may not have seen it. Of course, I'm going to get the name wrong. It was on the tip of my tongue. The one that Mary Clayton is in.
20 Feet from Stardom.
Yeah, 6 Feet from Stardom.
So,
yes.
Quick story about that. That was the movie that actually sparked the idea for this book.
Okay.
Because it came out, I think, in 2013, and that was the year I started writing. But there is footage at the beginning of that movie of talking heads, and they had these two amazing Black women background singers. Mm-hmm. Edna Holt and Lynn Mabry are their names. And I talk about them a lot because I just found them so compelling. You know, they had on gray short sets to kind of match David Byrne's gray suit, and they had micro braids and bright red lips, and they were just so joyful and so committed to the music that I just kind of, when I was watching that film, I had the strangest urge to stick my hand in the screen and pull one of them to center stage with David Byrne and sort of watch their dynamic play out over the course of a full concert. And that was the spark for those characters. So those were the characters. And then I started like asking questions. What if they were big in the 1970s? And what if this, what if that? And that's how the story was born. And I have since had the pleasure of hearing from Lynn Mabry and Edna Holt. They've both heard me talking about them on this tour, and they were so kind and so shared some of their memories about being on that tour with Talking Heads. And that was a huge honor to hear from them.
Well, that's great. See, and I didn't even know that. I just know you talked about Mary Clayton, and is it "Gimme Shelter" is the song?
Yeah.
You mentioned it in the book, and I have, because I love the documentaries, as I mentioned.
Yes.
I remember that. So yes.
And probably that song is part of the reason why I made Nev British, because there were so many British acts who were working with Black women at the time. The Rolling Stones, and there was a band called Humble Pie that actually had a trio of Black women join their band for a short period of time. But you know, whenever the Brits kind of wanted a more soulful sound, they looked to America, to Black women, to the church singers, that kind of thing. And so I wanted to have a bit of a realistic pairing in that way.
All right, sounds good. And see, I didn't even realize that part. So well, I'm going to get ready to wrap it up. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm just pulling out what's coming up next so I can share those things. For those who are still here, well, Dawnie, I'm going to take you down just so you can beginning to enjoy your evening. I want to thank you. I'm going to shoot you an email because I have a question for you that I'll ask you offline. But thanks again for being here.
Marcy, this was delightful. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thank you so much as well. And we'll be in touch soon.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Take care. All right. For those of you all who are still online, I want to just share with you what's coming up. In a couple of days, actually on Thursday, we will have Kendra Allen on. Let me try to straighten that out, who is a poet. And her new book just came out last week, actually, The Collection Plate. And we will have her on to share some of her poetry and just talk about her process and all of that. And we will have 3 copies to give away. Her publisher, Echo, has graciously provided me with 3 additional copies. So be on the lookout for how you can get a copy of this great and beautiful book of poetry. So that's happening on this coming Thursday. Then 2 weeks from today, we will have Lisa Cross Smith on to talk about her book, This Close to Okay. And that is in 2 weeks. I'll post up that information so you'll know about that. And last but not least, our August book of the month is going to be on August the 2nd, I believe. And we will be talking to Tia Williams, the author of 7 Days in June. So we got a lot of good things coming up with books. coming up in the very near future. So stay tuned to the Brown Girl Collective Facebook page as well as Instagram to know all of what's going on. And I look forward to seeing you and sharing wonderful Black women authors with you. So y'all have a good night, and I will see you on Thursday. Well, depending on when you watch this, I'll see you in a couple of days on Thursday. So thanks a lot, everyone, and you have a great evening. I appreciate you. Take care.